Hi, I'm Zana. I am a computer science PhD student at Harvard. I work at the intersection of human-computer interaction and artificial intelligence.
So, could you tell us a little bit more about how you got involved in research and artificial intelligence in general?
So my first research encounter was in Italy, Milan. At that time, I was doing an undergrad. I was pursuing my undergrad degree in Turkey, and I went for a research internship for a summer in Milan. And this was in my third year, so I was working on a pet robot and trying to make it convey emotions through movement. And I had to read like papers from psychology and dance to understand how to convey emotions through space. And this made me very excited about research in general, especially because I happened to work in an interdisciplinary field immediately. And after I went back to school for my final year, then I did my undergrad thesis in computer vision. So these two kind of like experiences with research led me to believe that I really like doing this and I want to continue doing research in the future. So I applied for a master's, and I also thought of like applying for a PhD after I do a master's first in Turkey. And for my master's degree, I worked again in machine learning, and I developed an algorithm to generate language in emotional language, essentially.
Hmm.
And this was very exciting. So that's kind of like how the roads led me here. And
Uh-huh.
now I'm doing research at the intersection of human-computer interaction and artificial intelligence by building systems that help people make better decisions.
I see, I see. Could you tell us a little bit more about the projects or work that you do in that group?
Yeah. So I work at the Intelligent Interactive Systems group here at Harvard, and we build technology that accounts for people's abilities, limitations, preferences, and tries to accommodate all of them. And it's very hard to do so because the interactions need to be reliable, although the underlying technology sometimes can be wrong. For example, an AI can be wrong, but the interface has still to handle that and so on. So my work is mostly situated in that broad area, but what I specifically do is that I build AI models and also interfaces to help people make better decisions. For example, in the uh, for example, now that AI is being deployed in very high stakes scenarios, such as recidivism prediction or disease diagnosis or loan approval, it is very important that people understand how the AI comes to those recommendations, and people have been developing explainable and interpretable machine learning models to do that. However, by like reading a lot of papers in the space and so on, we saw that while the AI is improving people's performance, is not that we are harnessing both the strengths of the model and the human. So essentially, what the human is benefiting from the AI is just like over relying on it and gaining from that performance, but not improving, not providing their own insights in the decision making. And this is very scary because even in decisions where a human would be actually correct, when they are presented with a wrong AI prediction, they just over rely on it and select that decision. So in a recent project, I worked on introducing sort of cognitive forcing functions that force people to pay attention to the AI's explanation and understand when it is wrong, so that they can make the right decision. So essentially, not fall prey to cognitive biases and just like over rely and anchor the model's prediction. And we saw that like forcing people to stop and think, just like slowing down the process even, resulted in better decisions on average. And this kind of like shows how important it is not to only try to build models that are accurate, but also to account for human cognitive resources and human cognitive biases in this whole socio-technical system. So this is pretty much my like overarching goal, is to make human and AI teams that have complementary strengths, like that we can harness both their strengths and not just the AIs.
Mm-hmm. What is a project in that group that you guys are currently working on?
So I just finished this project that I'm talking about, and another like future project is kind of like to understand where user's mental model is about the decision-making task, so we can provide appropriate assistance at appropriate times, for example, and not just like pushing them to think all the time, because that is very cumbersome and effortful in terms of humans. So understanding when we should provide the push, like the cognitive forcing, for example. That's one of the areas that I'm currently interested in.
Okay. Um, what is about the intersection of AI and then the human computer interaction that interests you the most?
I think that as these models are being deployed, like we can see at large how how they are affecting society and individuals, and it's very kind of scary, because even a like button, or like just like I voted in Facebook, a design like something, this has like large consequences on election results, or like in the small algorithmic recommendation systems, that the decisions that we make about algorithmic recommendation systems can have like large impacts on people's lives and their beliefs and so on. So I think that this is very important area of research, and not just trying, I mean, it's not that we need to have people working on machine learning and making the machine learning systems better, but I also think that as machine learning researchers, we need to think also of the impacts that those models have on people in general, like and that is what excites me the most. And also, for example, when you change the loss function and you see the difference in actual people, and that they are, for example, making the decisions better just because you improved something in the model, that's a very like a motivating aspect of the work, that you see the results of the work in the real world and not only in a toy data set somewhere. Yeah.
Definitely. Could you tell us a little bit more about like where those kinds of decision-making systems are like specifically implemented in real life?
Yeah, I mean, I mostly am concerned with human AI decision making high stakes settings, and as I mentioned before, for example, in recidivism prediction, where judges either decide to release or not to release someone on bail, and they also are assisted by an AI's prediction. And also, for example, doctors, when they decide if someone has a certain disease or not, they are also assisted by a model prediction, and so on. So or like loan assistance, and this like but while I'm currently working mostly for high stakes decisions, these decisions are also important for even small ones. For example, when we are like just selecting which in dating apps, for example, which person we are going to date with, and the algorithm, how it recommends like the people that we will see, that also is a very important topic.
Yeah, yeah. And then, do you have any suggestions on what to do when one is interested in ethics and the kind of like social good aspect for AI? Because I feel like just generally known to the public, there's not that many resources available when someone's interested. So, do you just have any suggestions?
Yeah. So I think that this depends mostly on where people are in their research or in their careers. For example, for undergrads or for people that are not working on research, I would definitely recommend reading papers on these topics, watching talks, and also joining conferences and different workshops, which is like a very great resource of learning more and also building network of people that work in these topics. But if you are a researcher, and especially if you are a machine learning researcher or an HCI researcher, I would definitely kind of push people towards thinking more about the ethical aspects of their model and the interventions. For example, people mostly when they in these days when we think about ethics, we mostly think of like race, gender, and these protected attributes. But in a lot of cases, we have to think deeper. And although there might be no differences in terms of race and gender of how our model performs and or like for how our interventions kind of like perform, there might be attributes that are important. For example, in our latest project of cognitive forcing strategies, we thought of like how can we think of how different groups of people are affected by our interventions, and we thought that the intrinsic motivation to think, so people have inherently differences in motivation to think. Some people like to think more and some don't, and this does not necessarily correlate with intelligence. So there is a correlation, I mean, but it doesn't like necessarily translate to intelligence, but still there is a difference like in motivation to think. And there is a psychological trait called need for cognition, which measures that. So we measured people's need for cognition, and we analyzed the results based on like how effective were our interventions for people that were very motivated to think and those that weren't as much. And we saw that our interventions were actually more effective for people that are already more motivated to think. So although our interventions were pushing people to think more, they were more effective for the group that was already advantaged, that had already advantage. So while this is not like something that we would like, we would prefer like that people that weren't like motivated to think would have like better scores. The problem is that, I mean, it's very important to report these types of findings because this is the ethical consideration part where you really, when you are introducing an intervention or a model, you have to consider how it impacts different groups of people. And in our case, it increased the inequality gap because these people were already performing better than people that were not motivated to think, and we actually are pushing them to perform even better, and we are increasing the inequality. But we reported this in our study, and I advise everyone to do so. Like even if it is kind of like a negative result, we have the responsibility as researchers to report these types of findings. And I think that this is a place to start if you are a researcher working even in fields that you think might not necessarily have ethical implications. I think that almost every research area does have ethical implications, and we have to have the responsibility to analyze and report those implications.
Going along with kind of just asking you for suggestions, what would you suggest for someone who's interested in like the AI and the HCI just intersection? Like, how would you kind of transfer from like one to the other, for example?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it like AI and HCI are both very broad fields, and it depends on where you're coming from. Like if you're in more in applied machine learning type of research, then you already have a lot of this HCI. You have seen a lot of the results that actually how people interacted with your tool and so on. So that would need maybe a less background, but for undergrad students, I would advise them to take a class initially to see if they'd like it, and to take an HCI class if if they have a machine learning background, and vice versa if they have an HCI background. Or but I think that an HCI class is fun, so I would advise everyone to take one because it's very fun, especially even if you're a machine learning researcher that are not necessarily interested in AI. In HCI, I would definitely advise people to take an HCI class because it brings a lot of perspective, and that's I was very much elucidated when I took my first HCI class, coming from a machine learning perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you also mentioned in your biography that you're from Kosovo, and so what is it like having a diverse background and being a woman in AI?
Yeah, so I will answer the first part of the question first. So I am the first PhD student, like in any field,
Uh-huh.
at Harvard from Kosovo. So it's kind of tough, I guess. And this is not only just at Harvard. It's pretty, I would say, maybe in top 10 uh, institutions. Probably I am the first PhD student from Kosovo, and it was hard because I couldn't find people from my background that I could ask them questions about, like, oh, how to succeed, or like what are the paths that I can follow to come to Harvard in the first place. And that was really challenging because I had to devise and kind of like to find the nearest neighbors sort of in my head of like how to achieve my dreams, which were like coming here and studying in a top program. So I finished my high school in Kosovo, and the best path from there looked like going through Turkey as a stepping stone and then coming here for a PhD. And that's what I did. But it's not like something that I knew that I would have these results. I just like gambled, and that was like how I came here mostly. I mean, because I could have also gone to European universities, but I saw more Turkish students that were coming to the US than from some European countries that I was accepted in. So yeah, I came here in that way, and that was hard from Kosovo. Doing that from Kosovo was a little bit challenging. And as a woman, I think that I would advise all women to be more self-confident and not like kind of, a lot of people have these stereotypes, unfortunately, that women are not as good researchers in AI or like in types of like these mathy classes, and they kind of shy away from them. But I would definitely push women forward and saying that you're doing great, and take those method classes that you think that are too hard for you, because they are not hard. And even if they are, they are hard for everyone. So yeah.
Yeah. If you could go back in time and tell 18-year-old Zana anything or any advice, what would you tell her?
I would probably tell her a lot of advice, but one that comes particularly to mind as in terms of research, it was, I don't know why I had this thought that I need to have very good foundations of computer science in order to do research. So I mainly focused on getting a good GPA, and like it wasn't that people around me were doing research, and I also didn't kind of like get into research until my third year. So I would advise her to kind of just join a group of PhD students, or like a research group, and try out research, become a part of an ongoing project. And even if it's your input is not that substantial, you're still learning, and that's okay. So yeah, I mean, in starting research in early stages is a good thing, I would say, because you have more time to explore more, and that's good. And you get more perspectives from different fields if you're interested. So yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess kind of going along with like that same phrase, for younger students who are interested in pursuing machine learning as like an undergraduate student or even a graduate student, do you have any advice for them?
um yeah, I think that my advice is, of course, like taking all these machine learning related classes is very good for your machine learning career and so on. But I would definitely advise all of them to take also social science classes, because it's very important to understand some societal issues and societal impacts of your work. And a lot of research, I'm sorry, a lot of like engineering and science programs don't do that, and they give you a perspective of that you're just an engineer, but your work actually has consequences in the real world. And then by taking these classes, I think that it broadens your perspective and seeing, and you can see how your work can actually uh, like mitigate some of the biases that are in the world, or maybe make the world better place in places that are actually needed. And yeah, that's kind of like my
Mhm.
advice.
Yeah, and then just one last question. Where do you see your work going in like the next 5 years? Or like what do you hope that AI has kind of evolved into then?
um I don't know. I think that I'm turning to be more pessimistic than I was before in terms of AI. I think that like, even for example, these large language models that look like wonderful and they are generating very human-like language, they can be very risky because they are encoding also all of our human stereotypes and human biases, and you can control maybe to a certain degree for gender biases or like racial biases, but there is infinite amount of human knowledge that those language models contain, and to control for that is impossible because you will have to know everything in every field. And as AI researcher, I don't think that that's possible kind of like to control, oh, okay, but and then also like the historical accounts and that they encode, because history is written from like different perspectives, can be written from
Mm-hmm.
different perspectives, right? And so which side are you in? So as a AI researcher, you're picking a side, right? And generally that side is the majority, or like the history written from the more powerful side. And I don't know, I feel that it's we have to be more careful when we deploy these models, and we have to kind of like whatever the AI models we're deploying in the wild, we have to actually make them application specific, audit them for biases in that application, and just like say and kind of develop those model cards and data set cards where we say, oh, we've trained this model with X data set that, and we tested it for X stereotypes, X biases, and I don't know, and kind of explicitly say what this model can do and cannot do, so that people that will use it after us actually know exactly where how to use that, or like where it can fail. So I guess like I would say that AI should be like the research in AI. It is exciting, but it also I really raise flags in terms of responsibility and how we should look at AI models in terms of ethics. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much for answering and for your time. I
thank you
really
so
enjoyed
much.
talking to you and getting to know more about like the kind of research you do, and I think all the advice that you gave is really applicable for me as well.